All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and all the ships at sea. This is Tom Salemi. I'm editorial director at DeviceTalks. And this week on DeviceTalks Weekly, we're going to be talking about Medtech at war. That's right. The medtech industry has been fighting its war against the pandemic, COVID-19, for months now. But it became more or less official this week when the Trump administration invoked the Defense Production Act, which is a Korean War era act that gives the federal government the ability, at least, to have a more direct hand in production of needed supplies, needed equipment in a war. And this is a war against COVID-19. I think we all feel a bit under siege. And the actions this week by the Trump administration, which were interesting, are largely well received by the medtech industry, although it's unclear exactly what it means and how the act will be used. But we'll talk with executives from Hologic, executives from Fluidda, about what the actions, what the invocation of the DPA means for medtech. But of course, we'll kick off this episode, a conversation with my pal, Chris Newmarker, executive editor of Life Sciences at Mass Device. Chris and I will hit upon some actions that the medtech industry has already taken in this battle against COVID-19. Chris, how's it going today?
As well as could be expected, considering the fact we're all stuck in our homes. So
We're all stuck in our homes, but we're also at war.
yes, we are.
The music rumbling forward. The medtech industry has been enlisted, hasn't already been committed to the war against COVID-19. And we, of course, don't want to make light of this, but the medtech sector is being brought front and center as states and hospitals and frankly everybody demands more ventilators, more respirators, more supplies, more of everything that's needed to battle this. And it's become kind of an issue on, I don't want to say the political scene, but if you got the Trump administration invoking the Defense Production Act on one hand, but also saying the governors are primarily responsible for securing these materials in the other. MedTech's kind of caught in the middle doing what they do. I'm wondering what you're hearing from folks out there, how they feel about being dragged into this I don't want to say debate because I don't want to politicize it, but it's not a clean discussion. And frankly, MedTech folks are just trying to do what they do, which is create devices that save lives.
Right. And, I think that it is kind of like, okay, like the Defense Production Act, is invoked by the president. That's a extraordinary action that goes back to the Korean War. I mean, basically saying that he could, he was saying when he invoked it that like, we'll, just in case we need it, but it means he could tell the Department of Defense to go and order, say, Medtronic to make thousands of ventilators, and you've got to make these now, and everything else you're going to do, you got to do that after because this is the most important thing. You're kind of like it's kind of like the industry getting drafted by the government. So we'll see how it goes. I'm not an economist, but I know that when the government starts ordering industries to do things and supply things, that you can see weird things happening with supply chains. So
that's the complicated part, right? Because we don't know where the interference will begin and where it will end, or if it will come at all. And those are the questions that I'm hearing from folks as to, look, we're already leaning into this effort. I mean, you can talk a bit about the ventilator article you had this week on Mass Device. Companies are stepping up and increasing their productions. What are we seeing there?
I mean, you have even things as extraordinary as like like General Motors saying like, well, if you want to use our shuttered auto plants right now to make ventilators, Elon Musk is getting in on the act. It's like, oh, maybe we can make some ventilators over at Tesla. But probably the more realistic thing right now is like Medtronic saying that they're going to be doubling ventilator production. So there we go. We're getting some more ventilators out. I mean, it's extremely important. I've seen media reports of like their doctors right now in Italy that are making life and death decisions because they don't have enough ventilators for seriously ill people. And it's not hard to think that we're going to be getting into that same situation very soon in this country as well. So we need those ventilators, and we need those respiratory masks, because it's going to be very hard for health providers to take care of us if they're worried about getting sick as well. So can I say something maybe a little more optimistic?
Yes,
Why not? I mean,
please. I
I'm
think we
sorry, this
all
is
want to
starting
hear
to feel like
that.
a downer. I'm just like, it's just been, it's just too like, I mean, one of our predecessors, Brian Johnson, who, founded, co-founded DeviceTalks and Mass Device. He's a Mass Medic president now, and he was a few days ago putting something out on LinkedIn. I saw where he was, comparing the situation for the industry to Dunkirk. He was saying like anybody's got a medtech idea, this is your chance. You're going to be like the British fishing boats heading over to Belgium, like get us your ideas. Like this is our, like the quote he said was, "This is our Dunkirk." So, I mean, maybe this is a real chance for, like, we all hear people talking the talk in the industry of like, hey, we're here to help people. Well, this is the time to really figure out how to help people, get some expertise going to solve these problems.
All right, well, let's take a quick break from my conversation with Chris to meet a fellow I came to know when I was organizing a respiratory innovation meeting. Jan de Backer is the CEO of a company called Fluidda. Fluidda recently received FDA approval for its Bronco Lab, which is a very cool digital imaging diagnostic that measures the performance of the lung. I'll let Jan get into the particulars. But Jan is an extremely thoughtful medtech executive. Even prior to COVID-19, he was very engaged in respiratory conditions, particularly those last year during the wildfires. He was at the forefront of trying to provide help for firefighters. So came to know Jan. He has some really important perspectives on innovation and on bringing new technology into respiratory care. So let's listen. Well, Jan de Backer, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to reconnect with you. You and I worked on a previous event, and you were always did such a nice job sort of pushing forth on the respiratory issues, or the issues facing respiratory startups. I really appreciated having you involved in those events. So I wanted to get your take on where we are today. Before I ask you some questions about what's happening in the world today, I do want to introduce our listeners a bit to Fluidda and to Bronco Lab, a new technology that just received an approval by the FDA. So if you could take a moment, introduce folks to Fluidda and what Bronco Lab does.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So within Fluidda, we've developed image-based technology over the last couple of years. So the technology is called functional respiratory imaging, and it essentially starts from high-resolution, low-dose CT scans. So the input into the software algorithm is the conventional CT scan that is available in any modern hospital worldwide these days. So what the algorithms do is they convert the CT scans into 3D geometries of the anatomical structures, whether it's airways, blood vessels, lobe volumes, fibrosis, emphysema. So you really quantify those elements very accurately. And in the next phase, you use methods from aerospace engineering, which is my background. So you use methods from aerospace engineering to simulate flows in those airways to add even an additional level of functionality to it. So the end result is a very accurate description of regional lung structure and regional lung function. And this means that you can actually, in a very sensitive way, understand how healthy or diseased the lung is for a particular patient. So that's the underlying technology. And Bronco Lab is very much the online platform that allows physicians to upload their CT scans, and after which they can look at the reports, they can look at the regional data.
And this is a technology, obviously, that is in critical need today with all that's going on in the world with COVID-19. This is largely a respiratory disease. How are you sort of approaching this as a smaller company with this technology that can help diagnose patients, help monitor patients? How do you reach out and make sure that people know what you're able to do?
I think it's a very relevant question, of course. And maybe to start off, to maybe set the scene a little bit, why this is needed specifically for indications like COVID-19. So the lung has a remarkable capability of compensating for disease that is present on a regional level. So you can actually have already a lot of disease in your lungs, while the conventional endpoints actually say everything is still normal. So maybe you know that the conventional endpoint or the test in lung disease is called spirometry. So you ask the patient to forcefully exhale into a machine, and that is very much driven by these healthy zones. So the underlying disease is not always detected in an early stage. Now, if you look at what this virus does, so it binds to the receptors in the lungs, so the ACE2 receptors. So your body then tries to fight the virus, and it tries to do that by creating inflammatory cells. Now, in a small percentage of the population, you'll have an overreaction of this production of these cells, which kind of floods the lung with these cells in a certain liquid. And of course, if the alveoli are being filled with liquid, it very much impairs the gas exchange. So these are the people that then are in need for mechanical ventilation. They end up in the ICU and so on. Mm-hmm. So it is very critical for these patients to be able to diagnose and detect this inflammatory process early on. And that's where good regional description of how healthy or diseased the lung is, that becomes quite important, and that's what BronchoLab offers. So what we're doing now is we're reaching out to the hospitals worldwide, in Asia, in Europe, and the US, asking them to send us these scans, which we'll actually analyze free of charge. If they send the scans, and if they send the clinical data in how is this patient doing, is it a patient that stayed stable, is it a patient that rapidly declined, and then we are quite hopeful that with these baseline scans and FRI and AI, we can develop a predictive model to determine for an individual patient whether the patient would stay stable or whether the patient is at risk of ending up on a ventilator in the ICU. Because if you know this is a high-risk patient, you can start treating them earlier with less complex ventilators in a medium care or low care setting to very much prevent the overuse of the healthcare system with a potential collapse as a consequence.
How do you, we're at a point where our hospitals are barely keeping up, if they're keeping up. How are you able to let them know about this technology that could help patients without disrupting their daily efforts, their hourly efforts, just to sort of keep ahead of the storm that's coming?
Absolutely. Yes. So I think, first of all, maybe if you look at the respiratory space, it's a little bit of a pity that we didn't start the innovation sooner, but often, there needs to be a big event in order to really start looking at innovation more seriously. And I think if there ever was a big event, we're living it right now with all the consequences. So the way we approach is that what we ask from these hospitals is just to send the data that they have. So they don't need to do any additional things in a certain way, just the scans that they have. It's something that we can already work with. And we've seen from the Chinese approach that this is very much possible. They started using HRCT scans fairly early on in the process. They had mobile units in the parking lot for screening of these patients. I think they did 200 patients per day, which is quite an accomplishment. So the data is out there, and that's the good news. The imaging data is out there. So it's all about analyzing it, using it now with the newest technology, very much to prevent the next pandemic. And I think it's important to know that most likely this virus will return in a few months. So the measures that we're taking now, they're good. They will slow down the infection rate, but also slow down the rate of herd immunity. So we will probably see a resurfacing of this virus, and I don't think we can shut down the world a second time in a period of 6 months. So we really need to tackle this, and we need to tackle it now.
So how do we do that? We yesterday the president invoked the Defense Production Act related to medical supplies, ventilators, respirators, and wherever else this would go. We don't really have a lot of details on this yet. How do you view that action? I know from the past that you're a very community-minded CEO. You've set up a fund for firefighters during wildfires in California. You definitely see the Medtech industry as a force of good and something that can make a positive change, as most people in the industry do, if not all. How does this action by the administration impact the medtech industry and more generally, and in Fluidda more specifically?
No, I think it's a very positive move. It's all hands on deck now, and I think the way it could work is that it will facilitate the introduction of new technology within a system that has been doing the same things for years and years and years. Especially looking at the respiratory space, we have been describing these diseases with symptoms, with spirometry, etc., which is always trailing the facts. Now, if you want to get ahead of an event, if you want to get ahead of a pandemic, you need to detect the true disease stage as early as possible. And that's what medical technology, medical imaging, AI processing, etc., it's what it can do. So if you can see whether an individual patient would be at risk of becoming very problematic and requiring intensive care, there's something you can do about it. Just to give you an example, so if we know that the ARDS, so the acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is the influx of the inflammatory liquid, what we're doing now in a later stage, we use mechanical ventilation to try to increase the pressure in the lungs to kind of push the liquid back to the other side of the membrane. Now, if we can do that in an earlier stage, you can probably do that with much less complicated machines, like CPAP machines, for instance, that pretty much almost, I wouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people have, because it's used for sleep apnea, snoring, and so on. So we can become much more creative with devices. We can also test potential therapeutics much faster, because we can see if it resolves the issue or not. And we can be much more proactive so that we don't get caught in this tidal wave of people that end up in the ICU. And that requires, of course, investment. That requires a vision. And that, maybe most importantly, requires a change in the mindsets of people that are now seeing the patients coming in.
Excellent. Those are great thoughts, and congratulations on the FDA approval, and thanks for all that you're doing to bring this technology to market. It sounds like it's something we absolutely need. And thanks, of course, for joining us on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
So, Chris, Jan de Bakker says it plainly. We need to focus more attention on innovation, and we need new technologies and new answers in the respiratory space.
No, exactly. I mean, I know that, like hopefully we'll see like some innovation when it comes to ventilators. I mean, like as a result of this. So, I mean, even though this is horrible, I mean, if you look historically, when you have wars and crises, they also are times of great innovation, because, stuff just needs to be done. I know that Siemens has been working to commercialize a device that actually filters, like actually not filter, but it takes, oxygenates blood, from somebody and puts it back in them, to be kind of like as an alternative ventilators. I wonder if, who knows, maybe that technology could, could end up taking off more because of this crisis, just because there's just a need for something to help people who are in respiratory distress. So, I mean, it'll be, these are definitely, what was it they said, the old Chinese curse was like, living in interesting times. We're definitely living in interesting times.
I wonder where this is going. I know you're working on a list of ways that COVID-19 is impacting medtech right now, and I feel like this list is probably going to change week to week. But what are some areas that we're seeing directly impacted by all that's going on in the world with COVID-19?
Well, I mean, it's just, I mean, we're at least when you're looking at the whole medtech space. I mean, you're kind of seeing this real companies that's trying to like go on full throttle, trying to meet, this supply that's just being like outstripped by the demand. I mean, that's a big area right now, whether it's like ventilators or respiratory masks or surgical masks or these tests. I mean, there's a shortage of tests, and it's a big problem. I mean, even here in Minnesota, where I live, the big story I was seeing on the top of the Star Tribune of Minneapolis earlier today was that, like, well, we have so many COVID-19 cases confirmed in Minnesota, but the state's saying it's way higher. They just don't have the tests to find that out right now, and that's a problem if you're trying to combat a pandemic. You want to know how bad it really is. It's hard to tell people to stay in their homes when you can't tell them how bad it really is.
And Medtech has answered the call. This week, Mass Device has reported on several companies that have received approval from the FDA. Many have received emergency use authorizations, EAUs, for diagnostic tests that can be used in the testing for COVID-19. In fact, we're going to talk with one of those companies. Hologic received approval earlier this week, and I spoke with Kevin Thornal. He's the division president of diagnostic solutions at Hologic. We talked about that company's good news. All right, well, Kevin Thornal, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Kevin, these are certainly interesting times for everyone, and in Medtech, I don't want to say in particular, but certainly there are some additional extra elements to it. There's a immediacy that is new to the sector, even a sector like ours that is focused on saving lives, but there's a lot of pressure to come up with ways to battle what's going on. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about your news of this week, the FDA approval for your diagnostic test. Can you kind of walk us through a bit of what the technology is that Hologic has out there that the FDA sees as a potential tool in this fight against COVID-19?
Sure, no problem, Tom. I appreciate the question. I'm glad to be here. So this is what we do at Hologic. We have a diagnostics division that's out in San Diego, and this is what we do day in and day out. We create tests that find viruses or any type of diseases or infections inside the body, and then we get that information back to healthcare providers so they can make a decision on what to do next. So really it all started back in the late December when we all started hearing news coming out of China, and we started to do some exploratory research with our scientists here. We have a lot of PhD microbiologists, scientists that work here, and a lot of people that are still here from back in 2016 when you'll recall the Zika outbreak occurred. The same group of scientists were involved in that, were involved with this as well. And on January the 8th, the Chinese government finally posted what the genetic sequence of the virus was. And once we received that, we were off to the races and able to start developing the test for this virus. We got a call pretty quickly after that from BARDA, which is part of the HHS, and also started talking with FDA around how could we bring a test to market really quickly, as soon as possible, and something that would be great for the machines that we already have posted and installed across the world and the United States specifically. And so we jumped on it really quickly. The assay design, the test design was pretty quick. And then since then, we've been working on all of our validated processes. What we have is a piece of equipment called the Panther Fusion. And with that, it's installed at close to 100 different locations around the U.S. Some locations have more than one. And what this test allows us to do is to put through 1,150 samples every 24 hours. And that's a high throughput device, and it can be run in a small hospital all the way up to some of the largest reference labs. We have some Department of Defense areas coming online as well, and public health. And what this allows a technologist or a lab to do is just load the samples in one side of the machine, and three hours later, the results come back. Easy to use, scalable. You could do one a day or 1,150 a day. So we started working with the government all through that time in January and February and with the FDA, and we submitted on Saturday afternoon, and by Monday mid-morning, we started to realize that we're going to get approval for what's called EUA, Emergency Use Authorization. And then that's what we received yesterday. So now we are working hard in operations to get up to that scalable amount of 600,000 tests for the month of April.
So you filed on Saturday. Did you anticipate that you would get a reply this week? What was the conversation like with the FDA beforehand? You must have talked with them, sort of had an idea, prepared the path, sort of had an idea what was going to come forth when you applied on Saturday, or did things just come together that quickly?
No, we've been in close connection with governing bodies across the world, but in particular FDA and BARDA have been very helpful through this entire process. Regardless of what you may hear or see on the news or what have you, they have been outstanding this entire time, have given us the direction and everything that we've needed to be able to complete our work. One of the things that's really critical about, that's great about our system, is that it is 100% reproducible no matter where in the world it's placed. So it's not like a chemist sitting in a lab taking chemicals from one little place to another to do a manual test. And so that was the work that we've been that's been completed in the last couple of months. So yes, along the way, we've been talking to FDA. They understood what our test design was going to be. They knew about the time that our testing and our validation and verification would be complete. And so when we gave them the submission on Saturday, they were ready to review it. They worked all weekend, asked questions back and forth with our regulatory team. And so it was not surprising for us to get such a quick turnaround given the public health need, as well as how great we've been working as partnerships just along the way over the last 2 months.
So what's next? How do you now ramp up and get these tests out into the market? And what sort of production are you looking at in terms of units available, tests available, what we'll be seeing out in the field in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, so we've been doing about tens of thousands tests between now and the end of March. We had a couple of sites running on what's called research use only material. And so we've actually been running for a couple of weeks prior to approval. And then in the month of April is when we're going to ramp up to 600,000 tests. And then we have additional investments that have been made to get well beyond that as well.
And are you coordinating with your customers who currently already have the system and also trying to fit new customers who want to bring that in?
Yeah, exactly. You know, we need to be careful that we're not over-promising and under-delivering here, and we need to make sure that we have very clear conversations with our customers to assure them a timing of when they can bring a test on board. So we do have some very large customers as well as areas across the country that are hotspots currently today. And then most importantly is our government in ensuring that we take care of our armed forces that are stationed across the world, that they have access to the test as well. So we've been working very closely hand in hand with the government. And so we will bring on new sites depending upon how this virus reacts and how long we're able to sort of, how long this virus is going to be out into the public sector right now. And no one knows that. And so we're preparing for the long haul, and we're going to be prepared if this thing keeps going into the fall flu season. And so once we get up even beyond the capacity we're talking about today, we'll continue to bring on new sites and new hospitals, public health labs along the way.
Great. And final question. I'm talking to you on Wednesday. The news of the day was the federal government's plan for dealing what's coming next, and it's been brought up about the invocation, perhaps, or potential invocation of the Defense Production Act. I'm just curious, as someone in the Medtech industry, how are you feeling about the role that Medtech is playing in battling COVID-19 going forward? And do you see a closer alignment with the government, a closer working relationship with the government as being, what kind of impact does that have on our sector?
Sure. I can only talk from my experience being in healthcare for almost 2 decades now. You know, this is why we come to work in the sector that we work in. Being part of Medtech is we want to do more than just make widgets and sell widgets. We want to give back to people and humanity and ensure that we can create devices and diagnostics tests or whatever part of healthcare we're in. We do it for a bigger mission than just producing products and making money. And these opportunities, our scientists say, this is why we were put on this earth, is to respond to health crisis just like this. So I would expect that my colleagues across other medtech sectors and other companies would have the same feeling that our employee base feels right now, which is just extreme pride. And they're just so excited that they're able to do something for the better good of humanity across the globe.
Excellent. Well said. Well, Kevin Thornal, thanks for joining us on the podcast, and hope to have you on again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again, Tom.
So, Chris, we have the Defense Production Act in play now. We're not clear exactly how it will be used or if it will be used and what the impact may be, not only in medtech companies, but also on their supply lines. I mean, there's some questions as to whether or not it'll be used or deployed to change the sourcing for manufacturing and for medtech products. It could go in a lot of different ways. So these are, again, interesting times to be covering the medtech industry.
I mean, I think it's going to be, what I'd like to see is like, how are things going to shake out in a few weeks? I mean, for now, right now, we got everybody in this lockdown. Hard to tell when it's going to end. When we finally emerge from this, where are we going to be then? I think it's really going to be at that moment. I mean, it reminds me of like that, during World War II, after the Battle of El Alamein, like Churchill said, like, this isn't the end. This isn't the beginning of the end. Perhaps this is the end of the beginning. And I think when we're through with this initial lockdown, or not lockdown yet, but I mean, like, everybody having to stay at home, these weeks of, the system trying to catch up and battle this thing. I mean, it'll really feel like the end of the beginning. We'll know where we're going to be going then for the next year and a half with us. Just hopeful that we emerge from this, like, feeling like we're on a trajectory to kind of like win this fight against this virus.
All right. Well, anytime you can end a podcast with Winston Churchill, you should do that. So let's wrap it up right there. Hope you'll join us next week for Device Talks Weekly. This is Tom Salemi. I'm editorial director of Device Talks. I can be reached if you want to comment on this podcast or anything medtech related. You can email me directly. I'd love to hear from you. It's Salemi. That's TSALEMI at WTWHmedia.com. And I'm also on Twitter and LinkedIn. On Twitter, I am at MedTechTom. Chris, why don't you share your information?
Yeah, I'm Chris Newmarker, Executive Editor of Life Sciences here at WTWH Media. Me too. Happy to talk always. See Newmarker, just like a Newmarker, at WTWHmedia.com. And you can interact with me too on Twitter at Newmarker.
Please share this podcast with your friends in MedTech. Share it on LinkedIn, share it on Twitter. If you do that, you can tag Chris and myself. We'd love to be part of that conversation. And subscribe if you can. Just push the subscribe button on whatever podcast player you're listening to, and you'll get this podcast delivered to your listening device every single time. And finally, tune in next week. We hope you all stay safe and work hard. And we look forward to covering the issues affecting MedTech and COVID-19 going forward.
Stay safe. Talk again soon.